Welcome to this story, one of the most unsettling cases ever noted in Kentucky. Before we dive in, share in the comments where you're tuning in from and the exact time you started listening. It's always interesting to see the different places and hours of the day or night where these stories reach. The earliest surviving record, tied to what became known as the Twin Curse, dates to the spring of 1899, preserved in a folder of handwritten affidavits discovered in the Caldwell County Archive. It began, as many rural tragedies did, with the purchase of a small, decaying farmhouse located 3 miles outside of Princeton, along the route to Hopkinsville. The property had belonged to a retired circuit judge named Alaric Wexler, who died under unclear circumstances that winter. The buyers were a pair of sisters, Agatha and Elise Rowan, aged 22, recently orphaned, and described by neighbors as quiet, proper, and without kin or caller. Their arrival coincided with a season of erratic weather. Late frosts blackened the fields, and the lowlands around the Tradewater River filled with mist. Local farmers were uneasy, for that was the year talk of the night riders had begun, men in masks who met under moonlight, sworn to punish corruption, but known mostly for intimidation. In that charged climate, 2 young women moving into an abandoned farmhouse stirred curiosity and superstition alike. From all accounts, the house stood 2 stories tall with a stone cellar accessible through warped doors behind the kitchen. Its floorboards creaked with damp, and the smell of root rot clung to every wall. The Rowan sisters kept mostly indoors, coming into town only for supplies and church on the second Sunday of each month. The storekeeper, Mr. Hilbert Crane, later testified that Agatha spoke softly, but trembled when asked if the house felt lonely. "It's never truly quiet," she had whispered. Read. The ground has its own voice. By midsummer, several neighbors noted strange sounds echoing from the hollow behind the property. Hammering, low voices, even the rhythmic drag of something heavy. One farmer claimed he saw lantern light burning past midnight where no one should have been working. Constable Ezra Cole made a visit in August, reporting nothing unusual beyond 2 nervous women and a strong odor of mildew. He advised them to keep their doors locked after sunset. Days later, Elise Rowan was found wandering along the creek in her nightdress, soaked and shivering, unable to recall how she'd left the house. Her sister insisted Elise had been sleepwalking. The local physician, Dr. Marden, prescribed rest and valerian. He noted in his journal that both women exhibited the strain of confinement and whispered fear, an impression of hearing more than they ought. He left them a lamp for the cellar and cautioned against staying up after dark. When autumn came, a letter arrived at the county clerk's office from an anonymous hand. It read simply, "There are voices in Judge Wexler's cellar. The twins are not alone." By early October 1899, the farmhouse had become the quiet center of county gossip. Children dared each other to run past it after sundown. Wagon drivers refused the shortcut road that curved behind the property. The air itself seemed heavier there, locals said, especially when rain began to fall. Only a few official notes survived from that period. Among them, a brief memorandum from Constable Cole dated October 6th. Visited the Rowan property again after reports of light in cellar window. No one answered. House locked from inside. Left message at church with Reverend Talbot. The Reverend's reply, recorded weeks later, offers a glimpse of what he found when he visited. The younger sister, Elise, was unwell, he wrote. Her speech wandered. She mentioned a third presence that watched from beneath the stairs. When I attempted prayer, she covered her ears as if the sound pained her. Talbot was not the only one unsettled by his visit. His carriage driver swore he saw movement in the lower window, like someone pacing with a lantern. When the Reverend went inside, the light vanished. This detail appeared in the December issue of the Hopkinsville Kentuckian, buried in a column between a story on crop prices and another on the growing influence of the night riders, whose masked meetings were now known throughout western Kentucky. The newspaper mentioned the sisters only once more. 2 women, residing near the old Wexler tract, have become reclusive under worrisome conditions. Winter set in early. Snow layered the property, muffling every sound. Letters from the sisters stopped. By January 1900, Reverend Talbot convinced Constable Cole to break entry. They forced the door near dusk. The hearth was cold, furniture overturned. Dried herbs hung from the rafters, brittle as paper. On the table Cole noted 2 teacups, one still half full, the other shattered on the floor. He described the scene with a peculiar phrase. The air moved as though the house had exhaled. They found Elise first, curled beside the cellar door, breathing shallowly, but alive. Agatha was nowhere in sight. Elise could not speak, her eyes darting toward the basement again and again. When asked if her sister had gone below, she only whispered, "She heard Father calling." The men carried Elise to town. That night, Cole returned alone, compelled by what he later called a sense of unfinished duty. He descended the cellar stairs, lamp in hand. The floor beneath was packed earth, damp and uneven. At the far wall, near an old root bin, he noticed something protruding from the soil, a corner of fabric, maybe linen. He scraped it free with the end of his boot, revealing what looked like part of a dress hem. Cole never recorded what came next, but his lamp was found extinguished beside the stairs, and his written report ends abruptly mid-sentence. The next morning, Reverend Talbot and 2 farmhands retrieved him, dazed and unable to recall the previous night. The cellar door was nailed shut from the inside. The only words he spoke before collapsing were, "She's down there," but not the way we remember. The sheriff's office in Princeton opened an inquiry, though the term investigation hardly applies to what followed. Sheriff Morgan Tate noted in his 1900 report that no official warrant was ever issued. The townspeople wanted the matter closed, not solved. The Rowan farmhouse had already become a site of quiet dread. Its shutters hung loose, and snow drifted through broken panes. Yet curiosity persisted. Local farmers swore that by February, faint light still glowed through the cracks near the cellar door, as though a lantern burned where no one lived. Elise Rowan, meanwhile, was placed in the care of the county infirmary. She rarely spoke. When the matron attempted conversation, Elise asked for a mirror, saying she needed to see if the face looking back was mine. Within days, she refused to eat, insisting her reflection no longer matched the sound of her own voice. A Dr. Marden visited once more, writing that the woman suffered from what he called twin separation delusion, a curious disorder not unlike those noted in certain war widows. He referenced a brief case study from a Lexington journal comparing her symptoms to those of patients described after exposure to the night riders' raids, episodes of trance and echoing memory. "Kentucky's air breeds strange phantoms," he wrote, "not all of them visible." By March, a formal search of the Wexler property began. Constable Cole, having recovered, guided 2 deputies through the lower rooms. The cellar remained sealed, its wooden door reinforced by someone from the inside. When they pried it open, a rush of cold, stale air met them. Their lanterns revealed the same earthen floor, the same root bin, but near the far wall, the soil had been disturbed. It wasn't a grave in the usual sense. Instead, they found a shallow depression shaped like a figure curled inward. The outline of human form had hardened, as though preserved by mineral seepage. Inside the impression, wrapped in remnants of linen, were several small objects: a tarnished locket, a fragment of mirror, and strands of hair braided with coarse thread. The deputies noted no body, only the imprint. Sheriff Tate dismissed it as collapsed soil and ordered the cellar sealed again. He filed the case under domestic disappearance, noting that Agatha Rowan left no trace of life nor proof of death. Elise remained at the infirmary until the following winter, when she vanished one night during a thunderstorm. Her bedclothes were found folded, her Bible open to a verse in Ecclesiastes. 2 are better than 1, for if they fall, the one will lift up his fellow. No one ever saw her again, though 2 years later a letter reached Reverend Talbot, posted from Tennessee. It contained a single sentence in careful handwriting: "I am with her now, and we are listening." The handwriting matched Elise's, though the ink was old and thin, as if written by a shaking hand. Talbot kept it in his parish drawer until his death, telling his successor that the twin story belonged to the soil more than to memory. In 1902, ownership of the Wexler farmhouse transferred briefly to a tobacco broker named Jonah Bell, who purchased the land at auction for less than $20. Bell planned to renovate the property and sell the timber, but he lasted only 3 months. In his one surviving letter to his wife in Louisville, he wrote, "There is a hum beneath the boards, like wind in a bottle. When I sleep, I hear the floor breathing." He abandoned the project without explanation, leaving his tools behind. The sheriff later described the rooms as untouched, yet unsettled, dust patterns wrong, as if someone moved through after the air had settled. The Hopkinsville Kentuckian published one more reference that spring, comparing the farmhouse uneasily to reports of vigilante raids in the same region. The night riders, still active, had begun targeting properties rumored to harbor secrets or debts. One editorial remarked that the Wexler land held both. The paper never directly tied the two stories together, but townsfolk whispered that Bell's sudden flight followed a midnight visit from masked riders, or from something older. The connection was never proven, yet it anchored the house in local imagination as a site touched by both man's violence and the unexplainable. The county surveyor, Silas Renfro, inspected the property that summer. His ledger notes a peculiar measurement. The cellar's depth had increased by nearly 2 feet since its last record. He attributed it to erosion, but added a curious line. The lower step feels soft, as though still settling. When he placed a lantern on the ground, the flame bent slightly inward, as if drawn by a hidden draft. Renfro closed the report with an unusual remark for a public servant. "Recommend sealing entrance permanently. The air underneath carries memory." By 1905, the property was officially condemned. Weather and neglect had split its roof, and the farmhouse sank by degrees into its own foundation. Hunters claimed to hear 2 women talking softly near the creek, as though one voice repeated the other's words. Others said that each spring, fresh footprints appeared near the cellar door, bare, small, and always in pairs. Constable Cole died that same year, reportedly still muttering about the shape under the soil. His notebook, discovered by his nephew decades later, contained a rough sketch of the cellar's outline with a single word beneath: mirror. No one ever rebuilt on that land. Over time, the stories of Agatha and Elise merged with county folklore, their tragedy recounted alongside tales of the night riders and lost travelers. Old-timers at the Princeton Tavern swore that the farmhouse still stood in ruin, half swallowed by vines, its steps descending to nowhere. Those who visited claimed the air around it changed, the wind silenced, the birds still. It was said that if you stood by the cellar and called one twin's name, you might hear the other answer from below. By 1907, the Rowan property had fallen entirely to ruin. Only the stone foundation remained upright. The roof collapsed inward like a rib cage, its wooden bones jutting from tangled weeds. Yet the site's reputation grew darker. Families who lived nearby refused to let their children wander past at dusk. Travelers heading between Princeton and Hopkinsville wrote in journals about an unnatural stillness along that stretch of road, as though the air thickened. A visiting folklorist from Lexington, Professor Edwin Voss, arrived that autumn to document oral legends in western Kentucky. He recorded several testimonies about the twin curse while studying the impact of the night riders on rural superstition. Voss later published a small pamphlet noting that grief, isolation, and rumor often produced what he called echo phantoms, a kind of psychic residue created by repetition and fear. In one passage he mentioned the Rowan sisters by name, suggesting that their story may have intertwined with local hysteria of the late 1890s, particularly under the shadow of masked riders and vigilante reprisals. Locals resented his analysis. To them, the twins' fate was not hysteria, but warning. According to one farmer's wife, the house listens more than it speaks. Another woman told Voss that her husband saw footprints appearing in frost one morning, leading from the cellar door straight to the creek, but none returning. Voss visited the ruins himself, accompanied by a guide named Jeremiah Pike. Pike later recalled that when they reached the site, no bird sang and no wind moved the grass. They found the cellar entrance half buried, the door splintered and hanging open. The stairs descended sharply, coated in moss. At Voss's request, Pike lowered a lantern into the blackness. It burned steady for a moment, then flickered out without smoke. "The air down there eats light," Pike said. Voss took detailed notes but never published his findings. In correspondence preserved at the University of Kentucky, he wrote that he had heard 2 breaths, perfectly synchronized, though there was no echo. He left Kentucky abruptly afterward, later describing the state as a country still at war with its own soil. By 1910, the site appeared only in passing remarks, survey documents, weather logs, and folklore collections. The county clerk refused further access to the original case file, claiming the papers decayed to dust. Those who pressed for details met polite dismissal. A few remaining elders insisted that every attempt to rebuild on that ground ended in collapse. One recalled that carpenters hired in 1912 reported their sawdust forming 2 perfect circles on the floor each morning, no matter where they cut. He said they left before finishing, taking their tools and refusing payment, muttering that it wasn't the wood that was rotten, it was the air beneath. By 1913, the Rowan story had nearly faded from local memory when a small article appeared in the Paducah Sun-Democrat. It described an itinerant preacher named Samuel Dre who claimed divine visions led him to cleanse the old Wexler property. Dre was known for dramatic sermons and believed the farmhouse was a wound in the ground that never healed. He organized a gathering of townsfolk, promising to seal the devil's stare. Only a handful attended, mostly curious youths and older men who remembered the twins' names whispered in childhood. The preacher carried kerosene and a wooden cross. Witnesses said he recited verses from Revelation before setting fire to the remains. The blaze spread fast, too fast for the damp timber. A sudden updraft pulled the smoke downward instead of up, curling into the cellar like breath reversing course. When it cleared, the stairs were gone, but the earth had sunk several inches, forming a pit shaped like a funnel. Dre collapsed, convulsing. He survived, but never preached again, telling anyone who asked that something below pulled the prayer out of me. The county authorities officially recorded the fire as accidental. The site was fenced, though the post soon leaned and broke. Hunters used it as a landmark, the burned hollow where 2 sisters vanished. Some swore they saw faint outlines of steps beneath the ash, descending into nothing. Around that same year, a traveling survey crew documented residual heat rising from the soil even weeks later, as though fire continued underground. Professor Voss, hearing of the incident, returned briefly to Kentucky. His private notebook, now kept in archives, mentions Dre's name beside a single annotation. Patterns of repetition mirror the early Night Rider terror. One fear replaces another, but the echo remains constant. His remark was not well received locally. Residents resented outsiders' linking their haunting stories to the Night Riders, whose violent raids still scarred their memory. Yet parallels were hard to ignore. Masked men under moonlight, the secrecy of oaths, and the shared silence afterward. The Rowan farmhouse, like the Rider's own legend, refused to die quietly. Decades blurred witness from myth. Children in nearby schools played a game called the Mirror Twins, daring one another to whisper Agatha or Elise toward any dark stairwell and wait for an answer. A few adults remembered the preacher's collapse, his voice broken ever after. They said that when the wind blew through that stretch of hollow, it sometimes carried a low hum, half prayer, half moan, rising from below the earth, fading before the words could form. Even then, the ground seemed restless, as though something unseen still breathed beneath the ruins, waiting to be called by name again. In 1915, 2 railroad workers clearing brush near the old property found what they described as an unnatural depression in the earth roughly the size of a cellar foundation. When one struck the ground with his shovel, it gave off a hollow sound, as if striking a buried door. They pried at the soil until a section collapsed, revealing part of a stairwell descending into solid darkness. The men claimed a faint odor rose from below, neither rot nor smoke, something closer to damp stone and old fabric. They reported the discovery to Sheriff Albright, who reluctantly inspected the site. In his logbook, he wrote, "Earth caved inward to reveal a space below. No bones, no structure, only void. Air cold, motionless." The sheriff ordered the hole filled, citing risk of further collapse. No follow-up was recorded. By then, the story of the Rowan twins had already traveled beyond Caldwell County, appearing in small pamphlets on Kentucky folklore. Most retellings blurred fact and rumor, blending the sisters' disappearance with local unrest during the Night Rider years. The historian Charles Betton wrote that rural fear in those years left behind scars, invisible but enduring, families vanished, farms abandoned, and tales told in place of graves. The Rowan case became one of those tales. A decade later, an aging Reverend Talbot's successor, Minister Alden Firth, claimed to have found one of the twins' personal belongings, a small mirror pendant engraved with the initials A.R., beneath the pulpit floor of his church. How it arrived there, no one knew. Firth kept it briefly before sealing it in a wooden box and burying it behind the chapel. Parishioners reported a faint ringing in the bell tower that night, though no one had pulled the rope. By 1920, new ownership claims emerged on the old Wexler land. The property was resurveyed for possible timber value. Workers unearthed fragments of scorched brick and rusted hinges that appeared to have belonged to a cellar door. One worker, Elias Boone, noted a curious effect. "The deeper we dig, the colder it gets." He later told his foreman that the chill seemed to move with him, as if it breathed. Boone left the job after 2 days, complaining of a voice in the dirt. Though the state eventually repossessed the tract, no buyer could be found. Surveyors described it as unstable marsh, yet rainfall records show the area remained unusually dry that season. Professor Voss, in correspondence late that year, made one final reference to the Rowan case. He wrote, "When men dig for timber and find memory instead, the land demands silence." His death followed within months, and his notes were never published. From then onward, the farmhouse remained absent from official maps, replaced by a blank field, noted only as undeveloped lowland. Locals said no grass grew where the cellar once was, only thin moss that shimmered faintly under moonlight. Travelers on the Hopkinsville Road still avoided the bend, claiming that wheels sank there as though the earth waited for weight. In the spring of 1922, the Caldwell County Historical Society began compiling oral accounts from elderly residents. Among them was Mrs. Ruth Klein, who had been a young servant in the Wexler household decades earlier. Her testimony, recorded in shaky handwriting, added new texture to the legend. She recalled hearing the judge's daughters, those Rowan girls, singing inside the house before he died, though history had long held that the twins arrived after his passing. "They were there before the will was settled," she insisted. "He called them his mirror children." When asked to clarify, she refused, saying only, "He wanted to see himself twice." Her statement revived whispers that the twins were not true orphans at all, but kin to Wexler by unacknowledged blood. County birth ledgers from the 1870s are missing several pages, torn clean from the book. The archivist noted the damage and filed it without comment. Still, a few references remain in other papers. A midwife's ledger listing 2 unnamed female infants born to an unrecorded mother at the Wexler address in 1877. If genuine, that would make Agatha and Elise not boarders, but heirs. The implication troubled those who knew the judge's reputation for severity and isolation. Even the few clerks who dealt with him described his temperament as precise to cruelty. The revelation prompted one brief resurgence of interest in the site. Reporters visited, finding little but ruins. They described the remaining stone walls as damp and covered in white moss, like ash turned to life. Beneath a tangle of roots, they discovered a slab of warped wood that may have been part of the original cellar door. One journalist from Louisville, Milton Parks, noted an odd phenomenon. His camera plates fogged entirely when pointed toward the pit. He developed them twice, each time yielding a faint double exposure, a blurred pair of faces, indistinct. CT overlapping, staring from the shadowed ground. Park's editor dismissed the images as chemical error, yet he kept the negatives, and decades later they resurfaced among his personal effects, still faintly visible, though the emulsion had cracked. Those who studied them noted that one face appeared slightly older, the other almost childlike, their outlines mirrored. Historians have debated whether this discovery revived or finally buried the story, for the photographs drew both skepticism and fascination. Local churches reference them in sermons about deceit and reflection, warning that sin repeated is sin preserved. By that time, the old Knight Rider atrocities were being re-examined by state historians, and once more the Rowan twins' tragedy was framed as part of that era's wider darkness, another symptom of Kentucky's fevered years when neighbors distrusted even their own kin. The farmhouse became a metaphor, a structure that swallowed its occupants, leaving behind only echoes and the memory of steps leading downward. Yet those who grew up near the site still spoke softly of it. They said the ground there hummed faintly after rain, and if you pressed your ear close, you might hear two voices still arguing which of them was real. In 1924, the state's Geological Survey undertook minor field work in Caldwell County to chart groundwater levels and mineral content. The team, led by a civil engineer named Thomas Beck, camped near the overgrown Rowan site. Beck's journal, later found among his papers, provides one of the last first-hand descriptions before the area was declared unsafe. "We set our tents on firm ground," he wrote, "but the nights are uneasy. Something shifts under the soil when the wind dies. It feels as though hollowness moves." During their second week, Beck ordered a shallow trench dug near the former cellar pit to measure water seepage. The soil was colder than expected, and a faint metallic scent hung in the air. The crew uncovered 3 wooden fragments that appeared to be steps, still aligned, descending into compact clay. Each bore scorch marks on the lower edges, as if fire had reached upward rather than down. Beck had them reburied at once, noting in his log, "Unearthly drafts rising from no visible chamber, possible gas pocket, but cause uncertain." That same month, a letter appeared in the Lexington Herald, unsigned, warning the public not to disturb what time has buried near the Wexler Hollow. The editor assumed it a prank, yet one phrase mirrored language from old police correspondence. "To lift the step is to open the breath." Archivists later traced the handwriting to a retired deputy who had served under Sheriff Tate in 1900, the year Agatha vanished. When interviewed, the deputy refused comment, but asked quietly whether the other one had come back yet. By 1927, the ruins were scarcely visible. Swallowed by undergrowth, the land rented to a logging company that cut trees along the periphery but left the central field untouched. Workers said their saws dulled inexplicably when they approached within 50 yards of the depression. One foreman recalled that fallen brand. "She's always landed in pairs, crossed like an X, no matter how the wind blew." When an overseer insisted on clearing the spot, his oxen refused to move forward, their hooves sliding on dry ground as if resisting. He abandoned the task after one animal collapsed suddenly and died, no wound visible. A year later, a local teacher named Margaret Dean gathered these accounts for her pamphlet, Vanished Homesteads of Kentucky. She visited the site in daylight, sketching the lay of the land. Her notes describe a faint sound like breathing underwater near the center of the field. Dean wrote, "It is said that sound in old hollows carries memory. If so, the Rowan ground remembers too much." Her publication sold modestly, but reawakened quiet curiosity across the county. Soon, travelers from neighboring towns began visiting at dusk, leaving coins or flowers by the depression as though appeasing something restless. When asked why, one man replied simply, "You don't go near it empty-handed." Even then, official maps showed nothing unusual. The survey office dismissed the notion of hidden voids beneath the land. Yet those who camped nearby swore that nights there grew heavier, colder, and strangely echoing, as if each breath they took returned from below, delayed by just a second. By 1929, what remained of the Wexler tract had been purchased by a coal interest seeking to expand its holdings along the Tradewater River basin. The land agent sent to evaluate it, a man named Luther Gable filed a routine inspection that turned into a curious footnote. In his typed report, dated May 3rd, he wrote, "The soil at the southern edge bears evidence of burning decades old. Surface temperature reads lower than surrounding terrain by nearly 5 degrees. Unaccountable chill persists through midday." He mentioned the depression only once, describing it as a circular sink, about 12 feet wide, sloping inward like an unmarked shaft. Gable suggested it might serve as a natural drainage outlet for the mines. 2 weeks later, he was found dead in his boarding room in Princeton, an oil lamp overturned beside him. The coroner ruled accidental suffocation, though no fire damage was present. Among his effects lay a folded sketch of the Wexler property. In the margin he had written, "Steps down, no bottom." After his death, the mining proposal was abandoned. The company filed a brief claim for loss of survey equipment, then withdrew quietly. Those who knew Gable said he had been troubled by dreams, waking often, pacing the hall, muttering 2 voices, 1 mouth. No one connected his behavior publicly to the land, but miners working nearby claimed their tunnels carried a hollow echo when they struck certain veins of stone, like air shifting far below. One crew foreman joked that they'd tapped into the twins' cellar. No one laughed long. Their lanterns went out 3 times that shift without cause. By the early 1930s, the story of Agatha and Elise Rowan existed mostly as folklore. Yet a few academics revisited the case as part of Kentucky's WPA Folklore Project. Fieldworker Anna Greer interviewed aging locals who still use the phrase, "the twin curse," to describe an misfortune befalling sisters or close kin. She collected fragments of rhyme. Children sang, "Two went down and one came back. One went down and lost her track." Greer included these lines in her 1934 field notes, alongside an observation that the Rowan story reflected the psychological residue of the night rider's terror, a community's way of externalizing guilt and loss. She never visited the site herself, claiming later that her compass needle spun whenever she approached the hollow. Around that same time, farmers reported hearing low rumbles under the ground after rain, like distant thunder, but steady. The county engineer blamed underground runoff from old mine shafts, though none existed in that precise location. A schoolteacher wrote in the local paper that her students refused to walk home by that road after dusk. One boy described seeing 2 figures standing where no road meets, one shadow, one reflection. When asked to explain, he said the second figure moved slower, as if listening first. By the time the Great Depression deepened, the county stopped maintaining that stretch of road entirely. It fell from maps again, and the land slipped back into silence. Only on cold mornings, travelers said, could you see faint mist curling up from the hollow, as if the earth below still exhaled. In the winter of 1935, a small team from the University of Kentucky's Department of Anthropology visited Caldwell County to study abandoned homesteads. Among their stops was the Wexler tract, listed in their notes as unoccupied ground near Old Princeton Road. The team's leader, Dr. Malcolm Finch, specialized in folk architecture and sought to document how early rural houses were constructed. His assistant, Clara Hensley, kept a meticulous diary that later offered the clearest surviving account of the site in that decade. She described the day they arrived as overcast and cold, the grass brittle with frost. "The land feels empty in the way a closed room does," she wrote. "Every footstep sounds behind you." Finch ordered a shallow excavation to locate the original foundation stones. Within hours, they struck the edge of what Hensley recognized as a stairwell, descending, not rising. The steps were intact, slick with damp clay, leading down perhaps 6 feet before vanishing into shadow. Hensley noted the wood was blackened at the edges, almost as if preserved by smoke rather than destroyed by it. Finch took photographs, but each plate emerged fogged. Frustrated, he blamed the cold. When he asked Hensley to sketch the pattern, she hesitated. "I kept thinking I heard something down there," she wrote. "Not movement exactly, more like someone whispering through earth." They covered the pit before nightfall, marking it for later study. But during supper at their camp, Finch began complaining of nausea and dizziness. He said his head felt split by echo. Hensley recorded that his voice occasionally doubled, as though two tones sounded at once. By morning, he was feverish and incoherent. The team abandoned the survey and returned to Lexington. Finch recovered partially, but resigned from the university the following year. When colleagues asked what had happened, he replied only, "Some rooms remember their owners too well." His assistant continued fieldwork independently, compiling rural legends for publication. She referenced the Rowan twins briefly, noting similarities between that case and the lingering hysteria left by the night riders. "Kentucky breeds echoes," she wrote, "and sometimes those echoes take the shape of people." Her manuscript remained unpublished at her death in 1941. Decades later, historians found among her papers one surviving photograph from that expedition. It shows a stretch of uneven ground with a dark line running diagonally across it, the edge of the stairwell, barely visible. When magnified, faint smudges appear near the top of the frame, resembling two indistinct figures blurred by movement. Whether accidental light or something else, no one could agree. The print still rests in the university archive, filed without description, its negative long missing. By the early 1940s, the war in Europe had drawn attention far from the quiet corners of Kentucky, and the Rowan story slept again beneath layers of newer fear. Yet the land itself, untouched and fenced by briar, continued to unsettle those who passed. Soldiers traveling by rail through Princeton sometimes claimed to see a strange shimmer over the fields at dawn, like heat rising from cold earth. Local papers attributed it to mist, but letters from returning servicemen often mentioned it, the light that moves without sun. In 1943, the county issued a short notice regarding subsurface instability on the Wexler Tract after a small cave-in was reported by a mail carrier whose horse stumbled near the old road. The hole revealed the top of a wooden structure. When officials arrived, they found a segment of stair still descending into darkness, untouched by decay despite decades of exposure. The workmen who attempted to fill the hole stopped after one of their shovels splintered on something hollow. The overseer, Mr. Calvin Jett, wrote in his maintenance log, "Soil dropped away clean. No rot, no mold. Looks new, but it shouldn't." He refused to continue the job and covered the spot himself with stones. That same year, a traveling photographer named Ruth Boyd, documenting war-era rural life, visited Princeton. She learned of the legend and made a brief detour to the site. Her surviving letter describes standing near the overgrown depression as night approached. "It's the quiet that frightens," she wrote. "No birds, no insects. Only that feeling you've come between two mirrors." She took one photograph, using flash powder, but the image never developed, only a faint outline of the stairs and a hazy light where the flash should have struck. Boyd developed other photos successfully the next morning. She mailed the damaged plate to a colleague in Louisville with the note, "Sumta, he absorbed the light instead of reflecting it." The plate was never found. By 1946, veterans returned home, and talk of the twins reemerged briefly as a local ghost story told at taverns. An aging miner named Jasper Reed recalled hearing two women humming under the earth while drilling shafts 5 miles from the hollow. His foreman dismissed it as underground vibration, but the miner insisted the sound carried rhythm, like a hymn sung out of sync. Reed's wife later told the Princeton leader that he woke nightly from dreams of a staircase with no bottom. Around that time, a state inspector filed the last known official entry about the site. His note was terse. "Sinkhole remains sealed, area unsuitable for habitation." Beneath his signature, he penciled a single observation, never typed, into the report. "When the wind stopped, I could hear someone breathing, but it wasn't me." The page yellowed in county files, forgotten among drainage permits and land surveys. And so, the record closed again, leaving behind only the quiet, the steps that led nowhere, and the memory of two sisters whose silence outlived their names. By 1949, new county development plans proposed building a small feed mill near the old Wexler Hollow. Engineers surveyed the area and found the ground deceptively solid. One of them, a young draftsman named Peter Long, later told his wife that he disliked how the field feels like it's holding its breath. His drawings show the mill's foundation plotted safely away from the known depression, yet construction halted after the first week when machinery began to malfunction inexplicably. Bearings froze, diesel pumps stalled, and concrete failed to set evenly. Workers complained that their voices sounded doubled, as though reflected back by an unseen wall. After 2 men fell ill from fumes that weren't there, the foreman abandoned the site. The company blamed groundwater contamination and never returned. Long's last sketch, discovered in an old roll of blueprints, contained no measurements, only a faint pencil line descending into darkness labeled simply, "Stairs." In 1951, a regional historian, Dr. Howard Marin, attempted to consolidate all known references to the Rowan twins. He found fragments of Reverend Talbot's correspondence, sections of Sheriff Tate's missing reports, and a few original photographs from the 1930s survey. His monograph, Echoes Beneath the Soil, Kentucky's Forgotten Hauntings, included a chapter on the Mirror Sisters of Caldwell County. Marin's tone was scholarly, but he admitted the case felt less like folklore than a memory retold by the land itself. He connected it to residual trauma from the night riders, arguing that local guilt had created a story too heavy to vanish. Yet his final paragraph hinted at something more physical. If soil can compact memory, the Wexler ground has done so until the earth itself imitates breath. He died the following year in a car accident near Madisonville. His research was never fully archived. Meanwhile, Elokai, all's resumed treating the area as taboo. Teenagers dared each other to visit at night, some returning pale and silent, others laughing it off. In 1953, a pair of brothers claimed to have descended partway into the old depression during summer drought. They found remnants of a wooden stair still visible beneath the dirt, dry and intact. One boy later told a classmate that he heard a woman's voice behind him say, "Not that way." When he turned, no one stood there, but his brother had fainted, blood trickling from his ear. The boy recovered, but he would not speak of it again. His family moved within months. Afterward, county officials erected a simple wire fence, posting a weathered sign, "Unsafe terrain. Keep clear." Over the years, vines grew around it, swallowing the warning. Hunters avoided the place altogether. Those who passed by said that on windless evenings, the fields seemed to inhale, a low suction sound, like the earth drawing breath through the cracks of an old house. Some said that if you stood still long enough, you could hear 2 separate inhalations alternating softly in the dark. In 1955, an electrical storm swept through Caldwell County, striking several old trees and burning a stretch of grass near the Wexler field. The following morning, farmers inspecting damage discovered that lightning had exposed a portion of the ground once thought filled, the top of a wooden stair still descending downward, clean and dry despite the rain. Sheriff Darren Holt recorded the finding, but ordered the area cordoned off until a geological team could assess the sink. The scientists arrived a week later and determined the cavity extended far deeper than local maps suggested, perhaps 15 feet before narrowing into bedrock. They speculated it might connect to a forgotten root cellar or a small cave system, though no opening to such a system was ever found. One student assisting in the survey noted in his journal that his compass needle trembled whenever he stood near the upper step. "It feels alive," he wrote, "as if the ground listens to movement." The study ended abruptly after one of the survey ropes snapped without warning, plunging a lantern into the void. The team heard it strike once, then silence. No echo, no flame, only the cold rush of air moving upward. They sealed the site again, this time covering it with concrete, though one worker remarked the cement took twice as long to dry, like something underneath was breathing on it. The report filed afterward recommended no further excavation, citing unexplained ground behavior and risk of subsidence. That autumn, a group of local students from Murray State returned on their own, hoping to collect photographs for a folklore project. One of them, Evelyn Crane, later wrote in a letter to her professor, "It's strange how quiet that place is. Even the crickets stop when you arrive." We found the concrete patch smooth as glass, but it felt warm to touch, though the air was cold. We stayed until dusk, and I sweet. Or I heard something under us, a rhythm, like footsteps slowing down. The professor dismissed it as nerves, Yet the students never completed the project. Within weeks, Evelyn withdrew from school and moved north, leaving no explanation. In 1958, the highway expansion between Princeton and Hopkinsville finally cut across the region. Bulldozers grazed the outer edge of the old property, unearthing fragments of charred wood and stone. Workers claimed to smell smoke, though no fire was present. The foreman ordered the soil replaced immediately. A year later, the new highway bypassed that bend entirely. Locals joked that even the engineers had felt the curse. But the older generation, remembering Reverend Talbot's words and the Night Rider years, spoke differently. They said that land had learned silence so deeply it refused to carry sound now. Not a bird, not an echo, not even the hum of tires at night. Travelers reported radios going static as they passed, the signal clearing only once the field was behind them. By 1962, the Wexler field had vanished beneath layers of road dust and creeping sumac, but the story remained. The Kentucky Rural Chronicle printed an anniversary piece titled 40 Years Since the Last Light, summarizing the legend of the Rowan twins for a new generation. The writer, a young journalist named Clara Dent, visited the site herself, noting the air hung heavier than weather should permit. She spoke with a few remaining witnesses, including an aging farmer, Grant Holcomb, who still lived a mile from the property. Holcomb described how on certain foggy mornings he could see faint outlines of steps descending just below the grass. "They come and go," he said. "Sometimes I think the earth still remembers the shape." Dent's article treated his statement with respectful skepticism, comparing it to the lingering trauma left by the Night Rider years, how entire communities once learned to keep quiet about what they'd seen. She wrote, "Perhaps the silence around the Rowan place is only the echo of that old obedience, an inherited hush." After her story ran, readers began writing in with recollections of their own. One woman claimed her grandmother had visited the twins before their disappearance, delivering preserves and finding the cellar already boarded. Another man said he found a silver hairpin near the creek engraved with the initials ER, which he threw away after it stayed cold in his hand. Dent compiled these letters, but published only a few, wary of exaggeration. In her private notes, she mentioned returning to the field at dusk with a tape recorder. The recording captured nothing but a faint rhythmic noise, like breathing through wood, she described. But when replayed, the rhythm repeated twice, one beat following the other by less than a second. She listened 3 times before turning it off. The tape degraded within days, the magnetized strip rinse. Cling on its own. In 1965, state archaeologists conducted a soil density survey for the Highway Department. Instruments detected a consistent cavity directly beneath the center of the field, shaped like a narrow spiral rather than a simple pit. The lead geologist remarked that it resembled a staircase coiling into itself. Funding cuts prevented excavation, and the finding was filed quietly. The technician who calibrated the sensors reported hearing faint tones through the earphones, 2 frequencies alternating slowly. He verified later that no power interference existed. As decades turned, the Rowan name appeared only in folklore anthologies and local museum notes. The land, overgrown and unlabeled, merged back into the Kentucky plain. Yet those who worked night shifts along the highway said their trucks' radios sometimes caught a brief flicker of voices near the old mile marker, always female, always soft, never long enough to make out words. One driver described it best in a letter to the editor: "It's not ghosts, it's like the past breathing in time with the present." By 1968, only a handful of the old-timers still recalled where the Wexler farmhouse had once stood, though travelers continued to report unease along that stretch of road. A local television crew filming a short segment on Kentucky legends decided to revisit the Rowan site for their Halloween broadcast. Their footage survives, grainy and gray, housed in the county archive. The segment begins normally, reporters standing in waist-high weeds, pointing toward the slope of ground where the cellar had been. But near the end, as wind picks up, the audio warps slightly, producing a faint doubling of the reporter's voice. Engineers later confirmed the microphone's cable was intact. They couldn't explain the distortion. When played back, 2 overlapping phrases emerged clearly. "The past never sleeps." The past never sleeps. The crew noted that their camera tripod trembled once, as though struck from below. They packed up early, laughing uneasily, and returned to town. That evening, lightning struck their parked van, blowing the fuse box but sparing the film canister. The footage aired only once. Viewers called in describing a flicker of light moving behind the reporter's shoulder, like someone walking down steps with a lantern. The station manager dismissed it as reflection, yet the rumor spread, reviving the legend for a brief generation. In 1971, a road maintenance worker widening the highway shoulder unearthed another concrete slab, the one poured in 1955 to seal the stair. Beneath it, the soil had sunk again, revealing a cavity lined with old timber, each plank descending into shadow. The worker dropped a stone inside, expecting to hear it hit bottom. There was no sound, only a rush of cold air rising outward. He covered it immediately and filed no report, telling a colleague later that something down there sighed, like it was waiting to be remembered. By mid-decade, folklorists from Western Kentucky University included the Rowan story in their course materials under the heading Mirror Folklore and the Duplicated Self. They compared it to European twin legends, but the Kentucky version remained uniquely anchored in verifiable names and dates. One professor noted that the case paralleled the lingering psychology of the night riders, how fear, secrecy, and repetition left traces even when evidence vanished. The Rowan farmhouse, he wrote, was not haunted by ghosts, but by imitation, voices repeating what no one said aloud. In 1977, the last known field inspection occurred after a minor tremor loosened the soil again. A seismologist mapped the ground and discovered an anomaly, a vertical void descending more than 20 feet, tapering into nothing. He sealed his report with a single remark: resonance detected but untraceable. The following spring, wildflowers grew across the field for the first time in decades, white and double-petaled. Locals said the earth had finally learned to imitate life again, though no one lingered to watch them bloom. Those who passed at dusk still claimed to feel a weight in the air, a sense of someone standing just behind, breathing in time with their own. In the early 1980s, the Rowan story returned one final time to public attention when an amateur historian named Louise Farrow began compiling lost Kentucky case files for a regional journal. She located fragments of earlier documents thought destroyed: Constable Cole's partial notes, Reverend Talbot's letter, and the unsigned statement warning that the twins are not alone. Farrow's writing was methodical, not sensational, yet she confessed privately that the material disturbed her. In an interview years later, she said, "It isn't the deaths or disappearances that haunt you. It's how the paper seems to breathe when you read it." Her article, The Mirror Sisters of Caldwell County, was published in 1983 and reopened old curiosity. Residents began revisiting the overgrown field, now fenced with rusted wire. A few claimed to find pieces of wood buried shallowly in the soil, still shaped like steps. One woman brought home a fragment and left it by her hearth. She told neighbors that each night afterward she heard faint knocking, as if someone were tapping from beneath. She burned the fragment 3 days later. Farrow connected the Rowan mystery again to the wider unrest of Kentucky's past, citing the night riders as emblematic of a culture that hid its own reflection. She noted that both the vigilantes and the twins seemed born of secrecy, groups, and people who could not exist in full daylight. They are, she wrote, different faces of the same wound. She ended her paper on an unsettling line: some places do not keep history, they repeat it. After the article appeared, a handful of readers mailed letters describing strange experiences on the old road, headlights dimming, car radios turning to static, and the sense that someone was walking alongside their vehicle for a moment before vanishing. One man swore he saw 2 women near the bend at twilight, dressed in outdoor Ted clothing, standing hand in hand beside a patch of low white flowers. He stopped to offer help, but when he stepped out, the field was empty. Tire tracks later confirmed his car had indeed stopped at the exact site of the old cellar. That same year, the county finally paved over the last visible depression. The asphalt sank slightly within weeks, creating a shallow dip in the lane. Maintenance crews refilled it twice, but by the third repair it subsided again overnight, perfectly circular as though the ground refused closure. Farrow visited once more before her death in 1989. She wrote in her notebook, "No sound of insects, just the rhythm of my own breath." And then, an extra one, quieter, behind it. The page ends there. Her journal was found on the passenger seat of her car, parked facing the field. The keys were still in the ignition. The last mention of the Rowan farmhouse appears in county records from 1992, a mundane entry noting minor erosion along the old highway shoulder. A maintenance crew laid new gravel and reported unexpected hollowness beneath the subgrade, words that, to most readers, meant nothing. But the foreman, a lifelong resident, recognized the spot. He wrote in his margin notes, right over the old cellar line. When asked about the job years later, he said the gravel never settled right, like the ground still breathing. The remark was dismissed as local superstition. Yet in satellite photographs from the early 2000s, the same section of road shows a faint oval discolored patch, darker than the rest of the pavement, visible only after rain. Surveyors call it moisture retention. The locals still call it the Twins Mark. Today, the Wexler tract is just another stretch of roadside grass and low timber, fenced by barbed wire and easy to miss. The farmhouse is long gone, its foundations buried under a century of soil and quiet. Only a few researchers keep the legend alive, mostly historians tracing the blurred edges of the Knight Rider era, when secrecy and fear shaped the land as surely as weather. They mention the Rowan twins in passing, careful not to claim what cannot be proven. The official record lists no graves, no descendants, no final confirmation of identity. What remains are fragments: a clerk's fading note, a preacher's trembling account, and that single letter signed, "I am with her now, and we are listening." Visitors who stop along the road still describe a peculiar quiet that settles the moment engines fade. The air feels dense, like a space sealed too long. Sometimes, they say, if you stand by the fence and look toward the dip in the earth, you can almost imagine a house once standing there, a porch, a window, and the faint outline of steps leading down into the dark. Some claim that after a while you hear two faint breaths rising from below, perfectly timed, as though one is answering the other. No one stays long enough to listen twice. The legend has outlasted its details. The Knight Riders became history, their violence studied and contextualized, but the story of the Rowan twins remains unresolved, a private haunting preserved in soil and silence. Scholars who visit the site describe the same unease, that the wind never touches the grass there, that sound itself seems drawn downward. They note that every attempt to measure the hollow fails, as if the earth refuses to be charted. A century has passed since the final record, and yet, on certain cold mornings, when mist clings to the fields of Caldwell County, drivers swear they see two pale figures standing near the bend, facing one another, perfectly still. Some say they vanish as soon as headlights touch them. Others insist the figures remain until you blink, at which point the space between them seems to open, like a stairwell revealed for only a breath, then gone. The land gives nothing more, holding its secret the way it always has. And in Kentucky, when the night grows windless and the ground breathes low, they still say the twins are listening.